The Sun Spoke, A Tale of Ancient Egypt, by Alex Wynne Ashwood. Dawn lifted over Siwa like a thin blade of gold, cutting the cool from the night. In the temple court, she swept the dust that returned each morning, the date palms clattering softly overhead as the desert wind slipped through their fronds. Water glittered in the springs beyond the mud brick wall. A pale band of light traced the pylons, woke the painted bands of blue and red, and climbed the limestone like a slow prayer. She paused with the broom in her hands. The wind felt different today, restless, expectant, as if the oasis itself had leaned forward to listen. By the outer gate, a boy ran past, breathless with rumor, and the sentry shaded his eyes to the eastern dunes. Word had scudded in on traders' tracks and the backs of camels. A Macedonian king was coming, a man who wore victories like jewelry and named himself son to any god whose temple would agree. She set the broom aside and pressed her palm to the warm stone of Amun's wall. The rock thrummed faintly, or perhaps it was only her blood. Either way, the morning no longer belonged to Siwa's small errands. Something vast had stepped into it. By mid-morning, the oasis no longer belonged to itself. A dust line blurred the edge of the dunes, long before the first hoofbeat reached Siwa. Men left the fields and the springs, traders abandoned their stalls, even the date palms stilled their fronds, as if waiting. She joined the others on the outer ridge, just beyond the temple wall, where the sand bled into the cultivated earth. The dust grew thicker, then shapes emerged from it. Horsemen, banners, spears catching the sun, the metallic shimmer of a moving army. At the front rode a man on a white stallion, his crest rising like a small sun in the heat. His banner bore the Lion of Macedon. The men around him moved as one, a machine of breath and will. The villagers said nothing. There was no one to stop what was coming. She pressed her fingers into the dry sand. This was not a pilgrimage. It was a procession. When he entered the oasis, the air itself seemed to tighten. His horse moved as if it had never known doubt. The soldiers peeled away around him in perfect, silent choreography. The people of Siwa parted without being told. She had seen merchants before, soldiers sometimes. Never a man like this, young, burnished by the desert light, as though the sun itself had chosen him as its mirror. He did not look at the people. He looked past them, as if they already belonged to his story. His breastplate shone like a river, and at its center the lion's head snarled in hammered gold. Someone knelt, then another. Even the palms bent in the wind like subjects. She watched his eyes as he reined in his horse, sharp, unblinking, not with wonder, but with certainty. A man who believed the god would rise to greet him, not the other way around. Inside the temple, the light fell differently. Outside was heat and noise and the raw pulse of power. Here, the shadows stretched long across walls carved with centuries of prayers. The priests moved like whispers, their bare feet soundless on the stone. They placed jars of perfumed oil, laid offerings, and opened the path toward the inner sanctuary, where no foreigner had ever been allowed. She walked among them, carrying the last of the incense, smoke coiling upward like the breath of Amun himself. When the soldiers entered, their armor seemed to clash against the walls themselves. The gold and bronze, the straight edges of their spears, looked wrong beneath these painted ceilings. And then he entered. Alexander. He paused only long enough to tilt his chin upward, examining the sanctuary not with reverence, but with appraisal, like a man inspecting his inheritance. He smelled the incense, saw the veils, and gave a faint smile, as if the god behind the wall was a formality he was willing to entertain. That night the oasis held its breath. The torches along the main path guttered and died one by one, leaving only the low murmur of the springs and the wind threading through the palms. She left the temple through the side gate, her linen dress brushing against the reeds, and walked the familiar path beneath a sky so clear it seemed to hum. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of water and earth. But the temple behind her still felt heavy, like something vast had woken, but chosen to remain unseen. She stopped at the edge of the dunes, where the cultivated land gave way to night and emptiness. The stars spread across the desert like a woven net, bright and merciless, and beneath their cold gaze, everything felt small. She remembered the stories whispered by her elders, that when the god speaks, it is not with kindness. She felt it now in the stillness of the sand, the tension in the air. The god was listening. And a man, a foreign king, intended to answer him. When the foreigners returned, they came like a moving flame through the dark. Torches burned along the main road of Siwa, the light sharp and gold against the night. She stood in the courtyard, half hidden behind the columns, as the soldiers entered the temple grounds in tight formation. They were silent but for the sound of boots on stone and the rustle of banners in the wind. It was not reverence that filled the temple, it was a procession of certainty. Then he appeared. Alexander walked beneath the torchlight as though the road itself belonged to him. His cloak caught the wind, his cuirass threw shards of gold back into the night. Priests bowed their heads, but their hands trembled. They knew, as she did, that no mortal king should walk uninvited into Amun's inner court. He looked neither left nor right, but straight toward the veil, not like a supplicant, like a man awaiting his coronation. The temple fell into silence the instant he passed the veil. No soldier followed. Only the torches at the edge of the chamber flickered, throwing long, trembling shadows against the painted walls. The air changed, denser, warmer, as if the desert sun itself had entered the sanctuary. She stood at the threshold with the priests, their hands pressed to the ground, heads bowed low. Alexander did not kneel. He walked forward into the darkness, his armor catching the light like molten gold, his breath slow and steady. And then the whisper came. It was not sound, but a current moving through the air. The torches flared once, as if in salute, and a single word cut through the chamber like sunlight. Sun. No figure appeared, no wind stirred the veil, only that immovable certainty, the weight of something unseen. The priests trembled. She felt the word burn itself behind her eyes, as if Amun had spoken through the walls, through the stone, through the very air they shared. Alexander lowered his head, not in reverence but in acceptance. The faintest smile flickered across his face, not of surprise but of recognition, as though he had always expected the god to answer. In that moment, she understood that he had not come to find a god, he had come to claim him. The priests whispered prayers, she said nothing. The world itself felt as if it had just shifted by a single word. When he emerged from the sanctuary, the night felt different. The wind had stilled, even the palms seemed to hesitate. Torchlight licked at the edges of his armor, and for a heartbeat it looked as though the sun itself were walking through the night. The priests bent low, whispering the old prayers, their voices roughened by fear as much as reverence. He raised his head, and she saw it clearly now, the look of a man who no longer belongs to the world of other men. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The word had already been spoken. His soldiers straightened as he passed, as if something invisible moved with him, and the people watching him, she among them, felt the weight of that single syllable pressing into the world. He walked not as a king, but as someone already immortal, and no one dared to breathe too loudly as the future followed him out of the temple. The army slept at the edges of the oasis, but the temple did not sleep. The priests whispered prayers in the dark, their voices low and brittle. The torchlight had faded, and only the faint gleam of the moon traced the outline of the pylons. She walked alone through the palm grove, bare feet in the cool sand, listening to the sound of night insects and the distant snort of horses tethered in the fields. The air still carried the warmth of the day, but the world itself felt changed, like a string drawn too tight. She stopped at the water's edge, where the springs bubbled softly and the stars shimmered above, unmoving. A single desert breeze stirred the palms, but it was not enough to loosen the silence. She realized that what had happened in the temple would not stay in Siwa. It would ride out into the world with the king who now believed the sun belonged to him. When sleep finally came to her, it did not come gently. In her dream, the temple was gone, swallowed by sand and silence. She stood on the threshold of something vaster than any pylon, a world opening wide beneath a rising sun. Alexander stood before it, his back to her, a solitary figure against an endless horizon. His crimson cloak rippled like a banner in the wind, and the light around him was blinding. Beyond him stretched mountains, rivers, cities yet to be taken, a map without borders. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The sun rose higher, and the desert burned gold, swallowing his shadow. She understood then. This was no blessing, but a claim. His story would walk far beyond Siwa, wearing the god's name like armor. And the sun spoke, a tale of ancient Egypt,